10 chilling details of already horrific murders. Welcome back to Odd Occasions, where we dive deep into the darkest, most chilling corners of true crime and the unexplained. Today, we're revisiting some of the most gruesome murder cases that left investigators and the public in utter disbelief, not just because of the murders themselves, but due to the bone-chilling details surrounding them. From killers who showed no remorse, to cryptic messages from beyond the grave, and bizarre twists that still haunt those who hear about them, these stories are guaranteed to send shivers down your spine. Are you ready to uncover the haunting realities behind these real-life nightmares? Let's get started. Number 10. Giggling While Reporting Murders. On January 26, 2015, in the quiet upscale De Zalze Winelands Golf Estate in Stellenbosch, South Africa, the peaceful night was shattered. Residents reported hearing raised voices coming from the Van Breda family home, a property nestled right in the middle of the estate. As dawn broke, they watched law enforcement and emergency personnel arrive at the scene, their presence signaling that something had gone horribly wrong. Hours later, the unthinkable news spread. 3 of the 5 family members had been brutally slain with an axe by someone who showed no mercy. The daughter Marley was rushed to the hospital, clinging to life, while the youngest son, Henri, was treated by paramedics for minor injuries. Both siblings had sustained devastating wounds. Henri was quickly taken into custody for questioning. Marley, who lay unconscious in her hospital bed, suffered from retrograde amnesia, unable to recall the horrific events of that night. As investigators dug deeper, the chilling truth began to unravel. When police arrived, they found Henri drenched in the blood of his parents and his brother. His initial story was that a stranger had invaded their home, a man clad in black, wearing gloves and a balaclava. He claimed this man wielded the axe that tore his family apart. But as his trial began, the prosecution swiftly tore apart this flimsy alibi. They revealed that Henri had delayed calling emergency services for over 3 hours, and then came the most disturbing detail of all. When he finally made the call, Henri giggled. "My family and I were attacked by a guy with an axe," he said, with laughter creeping into his voice. It's no wonder that Henri Van Breda was ultimately found guilty of murdering his parents and his brother with the intent to kill his sister as well. He received 3 terms of life imprisonment and in 2018 attempted to appeal his conviction. But those efforts proved futile.
Now, imagine being one of those residents, waking up to the sight of flashing lights, hearing whispers of the horrors that unfolded just down the street. That's something you'd never forget. Number 9. Message from Beyond the Grave. On August 13, 2018, a missing person report was filed by Nicole Utoft Atkinson for her friend and colleague Shanann Watts and Shanann's 2 young daughters. Nicole had dropped Shanann off at home after a business trip, but when Shanann missed a doctor's appointment later that day and failed to respond to texts, Nicole grew concerned. She drove to Shanann's house, knocked on the door, rang the bell over and over, but there was no response. Feeling something was terribly wrong, Nicole called the police and informed Shanann's husband, Chris Watts, who was supposedly at work at the time. When the police arrived for a welfare check, they found the house eerily empty. No sign of Shanann or her 2 daughters. Chris appeared on television the next day, pleading for the safe return of his family. But behind the scenes, the truth was about to unravel in the most horrifying way. 2 days later, on August 15th, Chris Watts failed a polygraph test. It was then that he finally confessed, first admitting to murdering his wife, Shanann. Initially, Chris claimed he strangled her in a fit of rage after telling her about an affair. And shockingly, he blamed Shanann for killing their daughters. He told police that after she'd strangled the children, he panicked and moved the bodies to a remote oil storage site. But investigators were quick to uncover the truth. Evidence revealed that Chris had, in fact, suffocated his daughters, using a blanket. He chillingly explained, "I thought it would be easier to be with Nickel if Shanann wasn't pregnant. I knew if I took my hands off her, she would still keep me from Nikki." In his mind, killing his family was the only way to free himself, to pursue a relationship with his lover. The tragedy captured nationwide attention, and in 2020, Netflix released a documentary about the case. Almost immediately, social media erupted with eerie theories, many viewers claiming that Shanann had tried to reach out from beyond the grave. In one scene, police review footage from a surveillance camera. But after the footage stops, something inexplicable appears on the screen. A haunting image seems to emerge, a fetus and a skull, both floating in oil. Many believe it was Shanann sending a message, a reminder of what Chris had taken, a moment that gave viewers chills, and left them questioning whether the dead can really communicate with the living. Number 8. It was too cold outside to bury her. In 2003, on June 18th, William Devon Howell picked up Janice Roberts, a 44-year-old woman, and quickly discovered that she was transgender. Upon making this discovery, Howell flew into a murderous rage and strangled her inside his vehicle. Roberts was not his first victim. 6 months prior, Howell had already killed a 29-year-old woman, and he would go on to murder 5 more women before he was finally caught. While awaiting sentencing, Howell confided in a fellow inmate. He called himself a sick ripper, a man possessed by what he described as a monster within him. He revealed horrifying details about his killings, one, in particular, that left investigators and the public utterly horrified. Howell admitted that he had kept one of his victims' bodies in his van for 2 weeks, sleeping next to her corpse, because, as he put it, it was too cold outside to bury her. Later, Howell confessed that he dismembered the body, cutting off her fingertips, removing her teeth, and then disposing of her remains in Virginia. Howell's vehicle, a 1985 Ford Econoline, was dubbed his murder mobile, a gruesome term that reflected the horrors that took place within it. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. In the courtroom, Howell expressed remorse, apologizing to the victims' families, and even going so far as to say that he deserved to be executed for his crimes. But for the families, those words did little to alleviate the pain and the haunting knowledge of what Howell had done. Imagine him, driving down the dark highways at night, sharing his van with the bodies of those he killed, haunted by his own monstrous impulses. The details of his crimes are the stuff of nightmares. Number 7. Tell the police that I had something stolen today, around 4 p.m. On April 6, 2009, a devastating discovery was made in Tracy, California. The body of 8-year-old Sandra Renee Cantu was found inside a suitcase, submerged at the bottom of an irrigation pond. The pond had been drained as part of a routine procedure, and what was revealed left everyone involved horrified. The autopsy report was deeply disturbing. Sandra had been sexually assaulted using a foreign object, then strangled to death. Toxicology tests also revealed that she had alprazolam, commonly known as Xanax, in her system, indicating that she had been drugged before the assault. At first, investigators believed they were searching for a male suspect, someone with a history of child abuse. But then, something strange happened. Sandra's mother received a peculiar text message on the very day her daughter went missing. It read, "Tell the police that I had something stolen today around 4 o'clock. I'm not sure if it makes a difference or not." The message came from Melissa Huckabee, a Sunday school teacher, and the mother of one of Sandra's friends. The day after Sandra disappeared, Huckabee walked into the police station, claiming she'd found a note that said, "Cantu locked in stolen suitcase." Bacchetti Road and Whitehall Road both had objects thrown into the river. She also mentioned that her suitcase had been stolen, a suitcase later found to be the very one Sandra's body was discovered in. What Huckabee didn't know was that surveillance footage had captured Sandra walking in the direction of Huckabee's home on the day she vanished, March 27, 2009. Just 8 minutes after Huckabee drove away from her house in an SUV, she called the police to report her luggage missing. To make matters worse, a retired Marine and his wife saw Huckabee near the irrigation pond where Sandra's body was eventually found. 30 minutes after she visited the pond, Huckabee returned to the church where she was later seen. Investigators searched the church and uncovered a blood-stained rolling pin. After testing the DNA on the rolling pin, it was confirmed to belong to Sandra. Melissa Huckabee was arrested and charged with murder. In a shocking turn, she pleaded guilty, avoiding the death penalty, but instead receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The disturbing part of this case is not only the senseless death of an innocent child, but the bizarre, almost calculated behavior of Huckabee, sending cryptic messages and inserting herself into the investigation. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes monsters hide in plain sight. Number 6. A secret ingredient. Joe Metheny was a musician, but he was also a man consumed by rage and a need for vengeance. His fury began when his drug-addicted wife left him, taking their young son with her. Desperate to find them, Metheny searched the streets, wandering through halfway houses and haunting the places his wife was known to frequent. He recalled a bridge in their neighborhood, where his wife often went to shoot up, but when he got there, he didn't find her. Instead, he found 2 homeless men sitting under the bridge. Metheny approached them, asking for information about his wife and son, but when they couldn't give him any answers, his anger took over. Grabbing an axe, he murdered them both in a brutal fit of rage. Metheny then disposed of their bodies by dumping them into a nearby river. Despite the grisly nature of his crime, he was arrested but eventually acquitted due to a lack of evidence. Yet, freedom didn't calm his violent impulses. It only fueled them. Not long after being released, he killed again, this time targeting 2 women he picked up off the street. He didn't just kill them, he dismembered their bodies and then did something truly monstrous. Metheny ground some of their flesh, mixing it with hamburger and pork. He shaped the mixture into patties, and for the next few weekends, he sold these burgers to unsuspecting customers. People purchased them, none the wiser that they were consuming human flesh. When police finally caught up with Metheny again, he chillingly confessed to his crimes. The first thing he told them was that no one had complained about his burgers, because, as he put it, the human body tastes very similar to pork. Metheny was sentenced to 2 life sentences, but his reign of terror came to an end in 2017 when he was found dead in his prison cell. The horror of his actions left a mark on everyone who heard about them. Just imagine, dozens of people unknowingly eating food tainted by his brutality. Metheny's twisted sense of vengeance and his remorseless crimes stand as a dark reminder of the evil that can lurk within. Number 5. Upside down inside a wall. Annie Liu was a bright 24-year-old graduate student at Yale University with her entire life ahead of her. In just 5 days, she was set to be married. But on September 8, 2009, everything changed. Annie vanished from a research lab on campus, sparking an intense search. Days passed with no sign of her. Finally, on what would have been her wedding day, investigators made a horrific discovery. They found Annie's body, stuffed inside a wall of the laboratory building, where she had last been seen. Her body had been placed upside down, and the sight was so gruesome that police could hardly believe what they were seeing. The investigation revealed that Annie had been suffocated, but not before enduring unimaginable pain. Her attacker had broken her jaw and collarbone while she was still alive. Soon, suspicion fell on Ray Clark, a fellow lab worker. He had reportedly sent her an angry email accusing her of leaving dirty mice cages behind after finishing a study. This frustration seemed trivial, but investigators suspected it was the spark that ignited his violent rage. Clark was quickly arrested and later convicted of Annie's murder. Despite his conviction and a 44-year prison sentence, the true motive behind the attack remains unknown. The brutal nature of the murder suggests a rage much deeper than a simple workplace grievance. Imagine the horror of those last moments. A promising young woman, about to start her new life, taken so violently and left in such a dehumanizing way. Annie's tragic death continues to haunt those who remember her, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a familiar face. Number 4. Killer Security System. For over 2 decades, the infamous BTK killer terrorized the Wichita area, murdering a total of 10 people. Dennis Rader, the man behind the BTK moniker, which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill, began his gruesome spree on January 15, 1974. His first victims were the Otero family. After breaking into their home, he bound each family member, and while they suffocated inside plastic bags he had placed over their heads, Rader stood by, watching and even masturbating. Just a few years later, in March of 1977, he struck again. This time, he murdered Shirley Vian Relford after forcing her 3 young children into the bathroom, locking them inside, and then proceeding with his brutal attack. Rader's arrogance grew with each murder. In 1978, he sent a letter to a local radio station in Wichita, casually admitting to the deaths of 7 people. After murdering 25-year-old Nancy Fox, he even called 911 himself to report the crime. And he wasn't done there. He wrote poems about the murder, sending them to the media, relishing the attention. His disturbing behavior wasn't limited to his crimes. He would sometimes hang himself from a tree or bury himself in mud, taking selfies while dressed in clothing he'd stolen from his victims. For 7 years after Nancy Fox's death, Rader lay dormant. But when he resumed his killing spree, he continued his twisted communication with both the authorities and the media. It was this brazen need for recognition that led to his downfall. In 2005, Rader sent a floppy disk to a television station in Wichita, thinking it would be untraceable. But he was wrong. Investigators uncovered metadata on the disk, which contained the name Dennis. This crucial mistake led directly to his arrest. During his trial, a chilling detail surfaced. In 1974, Dennis Rader had worked for ADT, a home security company. He installed alarm systems in homes all over Wichita, many of them for families who were terrified of being attacked by the very man installing their security. Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences for his crimes. A dark chapter finally closed, but his twisted legacy remains, a security installer who was, all along, the monster lurking in the shadows, exploiting the very fears he helped to stoke. Number 3. Highways of Horror. Millions of people drive the highways of California every day, unaware that beneath the roads they travel may lie the final resting places of children. Mac Ray Edwards, a heavy machinery operator who worked on the construction of many California highways, is believed to have kidnapped and murdered as many as 22 children. Most chillingly, he's thought to have buried many of his victims beneath the very roads he helped to build. One of his first known victims was 8-year-old Stella Darlene Nolan. In June of 1953, Stella was playing with a friend at Auction City Flea Market, while her mother worked nearby at a sandwich stand. Stella would call her mother every hour as instructed, until around 8 p.m. when the calls suddenly stopped. By 9 p.m., Stella's mother, Elena, began frantically searching for her daughter. She remembered a disturbing encounter from a week earlier, when a strange man had approached her, complimented Stella's beauty, and chillingly asked, "Is there any possibility of kidnapping, purchasing, or stealing her?" Despite the authorities launching an immediate investigation after Stella's disappearance, they found no trace of the little girl. But Stella wasn't the only child to vanish. Soon, others went missing: 12-year-old Brenda Howell, 13-year-old Don Baker, 8-year-old Thomas Bowman, and 6-year-old Bruce Creeman, all victims of Edwards' depraved actions. When Edwards was finally caught, he confessed to multiple murders. He detailed how he had disposed of many of his victims beneath roads, including under the Santa Ana and Ventura freeways. In a particularly horrifying admission, Edwards described how he raped and strangled Stella before throwing her body over a bridge. But when he returned to the scene, he found her still alive, sitting up in shock. When she tried to escape, he stabbed her to death. Her remains weren't discovered until March 1970, when Edwards led a highway crew to her burial site. Edwards' reign of terror came to an end in 1971, when he took his own life in his prison cell. But the horror of his crimes lingers. Imagine driving down a busy California freeway, unaware that the remains of innocent children might be buried just beneath your tires. Edwards' story is one of unimaginable cruelty, hiding beneath the mundane infrastructure of everyday life. Number 2. Former NFL player. On January 18, 1981, 20-year-old Sherry Hull was at work when a man entered the building and assaulted her. Forcing her down a hallway with a gun to her back, he noticed another employee, Lisa Garcia, approaching. What followed was a brutal attack. After sexually assaulting both women, he shot each of them in the back of the head. Sherry tragically died at the scene, but Lisa miraculously survived. As soon as he left, Lisa managed to call the police. And in a cruel twist of fate, police drove right past the killer on their way to the crime scene. The authorities were certain they were dealing with a serial killer. They believed he had already claimed several victims before this horrific attack. Despite their efforts, he continued to kill. But Lisa would eventually be the key to identifying him. In a photo lineup, she recognized her attacker, Randall Brent Woodfield. Woodfield was arrested and put on trial. Although he was convicted of Sherry's murder and Lisa's attempted murder, he is suspected of committing many more. To this day, he is believed to have taken the lives of over 44 people across several states, leaving behind a trail of fear and tragedy. During the investigation, a shocking revelation came to light. Woodfield had once been an NFL player. Drafted by the Green Bay Packers in 1974, he had briefly been a wide receiver before being cut from the team due to repeated arrests for indecent exposure. A former professional athlete, Woodfield had slipped through the cracks and become one of America's most prolific serial killers. The juxtaposition of his time in the NFL with the brutality of his crimes serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes true evil hides behind an unassuming, even familiar face. Number 1. Trinot Netchus Tikarmamos 1. Vanishing Steps from Home. On the morning of April 13, 2011, Holly Bobo, a 20-year-old nursing student, vanished from her family's backyard in rural Tennessee. Living at home while pursuing her studies, Holly had plans for a bright future. But that morning, everything changed. While at work, Holly's mother, Karen, received a terrifying call from a neighbor who reported hearing screams coming from near the Bobo home. Immediately, Karen called the house, and Holly's brother Clint picked up the phone. She asked if Holly had already left for school, but Clint glanced out the window and saw her car still in the driveway. It was then that he noticed something unusual. As he peered through the window, Clint saw Holly outside with a man dressed in camouflage. He assumed it was her boyfriend, Drew Scott. Karen, however, knew something wasn't right and told Clint to get his gun, fearing the worst. She reminded him that Drew was actually nowhere near the house that morning. Confused and unwilling to shoot, Clint called out to Holly and the man, but neither responded. He then watched as the man led Holly into the woods behind their home. Grabbing his gun, he ran outside. There, near Holly's car, he saw something chilling: blood on the ground. Just as the police began to arrive, Clint's worst fears were confirmed. A massive search was launched that day. By April 14th, authorities found scattered belongings: Holly's lunchbox, a piece of paper with her name, and a pair of pink women's underwear. But it wouldn't be until years later, on September 18, 2014, that the remains of Holly Bobo were discovered in a bucket deep in the woods. She had been killed by a gunshot to the back of the head. After years of investigations and arrests, Zach Adams was convicted of her murder and sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. His brother, Dylan, received a 35-year sentence, while Jason Autry, who cooperated with authorities, negotiated his sentence down to 8 years and was released in September 2020. Thank you for joining us today on Odd Occasions. Sometimes it's easy to forget that real-life monsters walk among us, leaving a lasting impact on the families and communities they've torn apart. If today's stories have reminded you of the fragility of life or simply made you want to double-check your locks tonight, don't worry, you're not alone. If you'd like to hear more bone-chilling tales of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and the strange side of life, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And if you have thoughts on today's cases or suggestions for future episodes, let us know in the comments. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you back here on Odd Occasions.